I stood at the kitchen counter, absent-mindedly pouring myself a glass of wine. The house was quiet, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound accompanying my thoughts. I had been lost in them a lot lately, drifting between memories of the past and the uncertainty of the present. But tonight, something felt different. A tension in the air, a strange undercurrent I couldn't quite place. Then, I heard her voice. "Charlie, you won't believe what happened today," she called out from the living room. Her tone light, almost joyful. I froze for a moment, the bottle of wine hovering just above the glass. There was something in her voice I hadn't heard in a long time, an unfamiliar happiness, a kind of giddy excitement that sent a chill down my spine. I knew she had been more cheerful lately, but this was different. I walked into the living room, wine glass in hand, and found her sitting on the couch, her eyes alight with an energy that seemed almost foreign to me. She looked up at me, her smile broad and genuine, as she began to talk about her day. "So, I was at school today, and you won't believe the feedback I got on my latest assignment. The dean, Mr. Michaels, he said it was one of the best papers he's read in years. Can you believe that? And then he invited me to this small group discussion, just a few of us, you know, the top students. It's such an incredible opportunity." Her words washed over me, but I couldn't focus on them. All I could see was the way her eyes sparkled. The way her whole demeanor seemed to radiate with this newfound joy. A joy that had nothing to do with me. My grip on the wine glass tightened, and before I could process what was happening, it slipped from my fingers. The glass hit the floor with a sharp crack, shattering into countless tiny pieces that scattered across the tiles. The sound echoed in the room, slicing through her words, and bringing her excited monologue to a sudden halt. We both stared at the mess on the floor, the red wine spreading like a stain across the pristine white tile. I felt my heart pound in my chest, the rapid thudding matching the chaos in my mind. It was just a glass, just a stupid, fragile piece of glass. But as I looked at the shards, all I could think about was how easily things break, how one moment everything seems whole, and the next it's in pieces, impossible to put back together. "Charlie, are you okay?" Her voice was softer now, tinged with concern, as she moved toward me. I forced a smile, shaking my head as if to dismiss it. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just clumsy, I guess." She knelt to help me clean up the mess, but as she did, I couldn't help but notice the way she still seemed to glow, as if the shattered glass on the floor hadn't dimmed her happiness in the slightest. And that's when I felt it, the first real crack in the world I thought I knew. There was something more behind that smile, something she wasn't telling me. And in that moment, as I watched her carefully pick up the pieces, I knew that everything was about to change. My life, my marriage, my trust, it was all as fragile as that wine glass, and it had just been shattered. I just didn't know how many more pieces there were left to break. Days passed since the shattered glass incident, but the uneasy feeling inside me only grew stronger. I couldn't shake the image of that smile from my mind, the one that seemed so bright, yet so distant. It was as if I was seeing a different side of Lucy, one that I had never known existed. She began to stay out later than usual, always with an excuse ready. Study group ran late, she would say with a casual shrug, or I was working on a project with some classmates. Her explanations were always delivered with that same cheerful tone, her words light and easy as if nothing was amiss. But it was her smile that bothered me the most. It lingered on her face long after the conversation ended, a constant, subtle curve of her lips that never quite seemed to fade. She smiled in the mornings when she left for school, in the evenings when she returned, and even at night, as she scrolled through her phone. I found myself watching her more closely, noticing every little detail. How she would hum softly to herself, how her eyes seemed to shine with a hidden delight, how her voice had taken on a softer, more playful lilt. She was happy, but it was a happiness that didn't include me. I tried to brush it off, to convince myself that I was overthinking things. After all, wasn't it good that she was enjoying her studies? That she was making friends and feeling fulfilled? But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, the gnawing doubt in my chest wouldn't let me rest. There was something more going on, something that she wasn't telling me. Then, one evening, I noticed something that set my heart racing. We were sitting together on the couch, the television on but neither of us watching it. Lucy had her phone in her hand, as usual, her thumb scrolling rapidly across the screen. She was smiling again, that same secretive, almost mischievous smile that I had come to dread. Suddenly, her phone buzzed with a new message. I glanced over, catching a glimpse of a name I didn't recognize before she quickly tilted the screen away from me. Her smile widened as she read the message, her eyes flickering with that now familiar light. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. Her thumb swiped across the screen, and the message disappeared. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Lucy glanced up at me, her expression calm, unbothered. "Oh, just someone from my study group," she said with a wave of her hand. Nothing important. But I wasn't convinced. I had seen the way her face lit up when she read that message, the way she had hurried to delete it as if it were a secret too precious to keep. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized that this wasn't just a fleeting suspicion. Something was wrong. Over the next few days, I paid even closer attention. I watched as Lucy checked her phone constantly, her fingers moving quickly to erase any trace of the conversations she was having. She seemed more careful around me, more guarded, as if she knew that I was starting to notice the changes in her behavior. Each time she smiled at her screen and then wiped away the evidence, my suspicions grew darker, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. What was she hiding? Who was she talking to? And why did she feel the need to keep it all from me? The Lucy I knew was slipping away, replaced by someone I barely recognized. Someone who had secrets, who had changed in ways I couldn't understand. And as much as I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, something held me back. It was fear, pure and simple. Fear of what I might find out. Fear of what the truth might do to us. But I knew one thing for certain, whatever was happening, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. Because the woman I loved was slipping through my fingers, and I was powerless to stop it. At least, I was powerless until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. The unease inside me had grown too heavy to carry alone. I needed to talk to someone, someone who would understand, someone I could trust. So, I called up John, my oldest friend. We'd known each other since college, and if there was anyone who could help me make sense of this mess, it was him. We met up at our usual spot, a small, dimly lit bar tucked away on a quiet street. The kind of place where you could talk without worrying about being overheard. As I walked in, I saw him already seated in our corner booth, a beer in hand and a concerned look on his face. I slid into the seat across from him, my mind racing with how to start this conversation. "Charlie, you look like you've seen a ghost," John said, leaning forward slightly. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my suspicions pressing down on me. "It's Lucy," I began, my voice low and strained. "Something's not right with her. She's been acting different lately, too happy, too secretive. And then there's the phone. She's always on it, deleting messages as soon as she gets them. I don't know what to think, John, but I can't shake the feeling that she's hiding something from me." John listened intently, his eyes narrowing as I laid it all out for him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, as if carefully weighing his words. Then he set his beer down and leaned in closer. "Charlie, I'm not going to sugarcoat this," he said, his tone serious. "It doesn't sound good. But before you jump to any conclusions, you need to be sure." "I mean, sure. You don't want to accuse her of something this big without concrete proof. It could blow up in your face." "I know," I said, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "But I don't know what else to do. I can't just sit around and pretend everything's fine when it isn't." John nodded, understanding the frustration boiling beneath my words.
Look, I get it. If it were me, I'd be losing my mind too. But you need to be smart about this.
You said she's been acting strange, staying out late, and deleting messages.
That's suspicious, but it's not enough to confront her.
Not yet, anyway.
He paused, glancing around the bar as if making sure no one was listening in.
Then he leaned back in his seat, his expression thoughtful. What if I help you keep an eye on her?
We can figure out a way to track what she's doing without her knowing.
You don't have to do this alone, Charlie.
We'll get to the bottom of it together. The relief I felt at his offer was almost overwhelming. I hadn't realized just how much I needed someone to stand by me in this, someone who could offer a clear head when mine was clouded with doubt and fear.
Thanks, John, I said, my voice thick with gratitude.
I don't know what I'd do without you.
Don't mention it, he replied, giving me a reassuring nod.
We're in this together. Just remember, whatever we find, you need to be ready for it. Sometimes the truth isn't what you want to hear, but it's better than living in the dark. His words hit me hard, the truth sinking deep into my chest.
I knew he was right.
I had to be prepared for whatever we uncovered, even if it was something I couldn't bear to face.
Because the only thing worse than finding out the truth was living with a lie.
We spent the rest of the evening hashing out a plan.
John suggested a few discreet ways to keep tabs on Lucy. Nothing too invasive, just enough to confirm whether my suspicions were valid. As we talked, I felt a small sense of control returning, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, I could get a handle on this before it spiraled out of control. But as I left the bar that night, the cold air biting at my skin,
I couldn't shake the fear that had taken root in my gut.
Because deep down, I knew that whatever we found, things would never be the same.
Not for me, not for Lucy, and not for the life we had built together. And that realization scared me more than anything else.
After my conversation with John, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out.
The more I thought about Lucy's strange behavior, the more I realized I needed to take action.
If something was going on, I had to know the truth.
No matter how painful it might be. And so, I began my investigation. I started small, looking into the details of Lucy's daily life that I had previously overlooked. She had mentioned her professors often enough in passing, but one name kept coming up more frequently than the others: Michael, the dean of her university. Each time she talked about him, there was a warmth in her voice that set off alarms in my mind. It wasn't just professional admiration, there was something more there.
Something personal.
I decided to dig deeper, searching for any information I could find about Michael. I spent hours online, scrolling through faculty pages, academic articles, and even social media profiles. Michael was well respected, with a solid reputation in his field. But there was nothing that immediately stood out, nothing that confirmed my suspicions. That is until I started paying attention to Lucy's stories about him. Every time she came home from her evening classes, she would casually drop Michael's name into the conversation. "Michael was so helpful today," she would say, or "I had a great talk with Michael after class." There was always a certain light in her eyes when she spoke about him, a smile that seemed to linger just a little too long. It was subtle, but now that I was looking for it, it was impossible to miss. The more I listened, the more it became clear that this wasn't just a student-teacher relationship. Lucy talked about Michael with a level of familiarity that made my stomach churn. And the way she described their interactions, how he went out of his way to help her, how he gave her special attention, only fueled my growing suspicions. I knew I needed to dig deeper but wasn't sure how. I couldn't just confront her without proof. That's when fate intervened. One evening, Lucy was in the kitchen, talking on the phone with a friend. I was in the next room, pretending to read, but my attention was fully on their conversation. I could hear her voice, low and conspiratorial, as she spoke in hushed tones. I know, she said, laughing softly. "It's crazy. But it's working. Michael is completely smitten. He's been giving me top marks in all my classes, and he even offered to help with my final project.
There was a pause, and then I heard her whisper, "Yes, it's serious. We've been seeing each other after class, and, well, let's just say I'm getting more than just academic advice." I felt the blood drain from my face as the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. She was having an affair with him. My wife was sleeping with her dean, using him to boost her grades and to get ahead in her studies. My heart pounded in my chest as I continued to listen, every word a dagger to my soul.
"It's perfect, really," Lucy continued, her tone light and carefree. "He's so infatuated, he'll do anything I ask."
I mean, who wouldn't want a little extra help in school, right?
And the best part is, Charlie has no idea. He's so wrapped up in his work that he doesn't even notice. I clenched my fists, trying to hold back the wave of anger and betrayal that threatened to consume me. She thought she was clever, that she had outsmarted me.
But now I knew the truth, and there was no going back. The woman I loved, the woman I had vowed to spend my life with, was using her body to manipulate her way through school, and she had been lying to me the entire time. As she hung up the phone and went about her evening as if nothing had happened, I made a silent vow.
I would expose her, and I would expose Michael.
They would pay for what they'd done.
My mind was already racing,
plotting my next move. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was about justice, about reclaiming my dignity.
Lucy had made the biggest mistake of her life, and she didn't even know it yet. But she would. Very soon, she would.
The truth I had uncovered left me reeling, but there was no time to dwell on the pain.
If Lucy thought she could deceive me and get away with it, she was sorely mistaken. My next step was clear. I had to find out just how deep this affair ran and gather irrefutable evidence to expose both her and Michael. The first thing I did was start paying closer attention to Lucy's schedule. She had always been predictable: early mornings, evening classes, occasional study sessions. But now, I began to notice a pattern I hadn't seen before. Her late-night classes seemed to coincide with unexplained absences or sudden changes in plans. I also noticed that her stories about spending extra time at the university or needing to meet with classmates didn't quite add up. I began tracking her movements more carefully, following her routine with a precision I hadn't bothered with before. When she left for class, I'd wait a few minutes, then follow her from a distance. I knew the risks. If she caught me, I'd have a lot of explaining to do. But I had to know the truth, no matter what. It didn't take long to confirm my suspicions. She was meeting with Michael far more often than she had let on. Their study sessions were anything but. They would meet in his office, in coffee shops off campus, or sometimes at a small, out-of-the-way restaurant where they thought they could remain unnoticed. But I was there, watching, documenting every interaction. What struck me the most wasn't just the frequency of their meetings, but the intimacy of them. The way she would touch his arm, lean in close when they talked, and the way he would look at her, like she was the center of his world. It made me sick to my stomach. But I couldn't rely solely on my observations. I needed hard evidence. So, I decided to dig into her digital life, just as she had so carelessly let slip in her conversation with her friend. It was time to bring in the expert I had hired, a hacker who could help me access her private communications without raising any alarms. Within a few days, I had access to her phone and computer. What I found confirmed everything I had feared. Their messages were shameless, flirty, suggestive, and downright explicit at times. They spoke of their secret meetings, how they had to be careful not to get caught, and even discussed their plans once Lucy's academic goals were met. She was using him, but he was too blind to see it, too wrapped up in his infatuation to care. The photos were the final nail in the coffin. They had taken selfies together, smiling, holding hands, even a few in compromising positions that made my blood boil. There was no mistaking the nature of their relationship. This was more than just a fling. It was a calculated affair, designed to advance Lucy's career at the expense of our marriage. With all the evidence in hand, I knew what I had to do. But this wasn't just about confronting Lucy anymore.
No, this had become something much bigger. Michael had crossed a line, abusing his position of power for personal gain, and Lucy had willingly played along, betraying not just me, but everything we had built together.
I spent hours organizing the evidence, screenshots, copies of messages, photos. I was meticulous, ensuring that everything was in order and ready to be presented when the time was right. But I wasn't planning to go straight to Lucy.
No, I wanted to make sure that when the hammer came down, it would shatter their lives as completely as they had shattered mine. As I sat there, staring at the mountain of proof before me, a grim determination settled over me. They thought they could play their little game in secret, but I was about to expose them for who they were. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice.
Lucy had made her choice, and soon she would understand the full consequences of her actions. And as for Michael,
he was about to learn that some lines should never be crossed, especially not with someone who has everything to lose.
This was no longer just a marriage unraveling. This was war. And I was ready to win it. The house was eerily quiet when I arrived home that evening. I could hear Lucy in the kitchen, humming softly to herself as she prepared dinner. It was a sound that had once brought me comfort, but now, it only filled me with a sense of dread. I had been dreading this moment, yet at the same time, I knew it was inevitable. The evidence I had gathered burned a hole in my pocket, a physical weight that matched the emotional burden I carried. I walked into the kitchen, and she looked up with a bright smile, one that would have fooled anyone else. But I wasn't anyone else. I was the man she had betrayed, and I could see right through her. The smile faltered slightly when she saw the expression on my face. "Charlie? What's wrong?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. Or was it fear? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the stack of photos and screenshots, placing them on the counter between us. She glanced down at them, and for a moment, she didn't react. But then she saw what they were, and her face went pale. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's the truth, Lucy," I said, my voice cold and steady. "The truth you've been hiding from me. I know everything, about you and Michael, about your affair, and about how you've been using him to boost your grades." Her eyes darted back and forth across the evidence, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind as she tried to figure out how to respond. For a moment, she remained silent, and then she did what I expected, she denied it. "This isn't what it looks like, Charlie," she said quickly, her voice growing more desperate. "You've got it all wrong. Michael and I, there's nothing between us. He's just been helping me with my studies, that's all. Don't lie to me, Lucy," I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "I've seen the messages, the photos. I've heard you talk about him with your friend. Don't insult me by pretending it's nothing." She flinched at the harshness in my voice, and I could see the panic setting in. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Finally, she let out a shaky breath and looked down at the evidence once more. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Charlie. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know what else to do." Didn't know what else to do. I repeated, my anger rising. "So, you decided to sleep with your dean? You thought that was the solution?" She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "It wasn't like that at first, I swear. I was struggling in my classes, and Michael offered to help. It started innocent, but then, it just got out of control. He was offering me better grades, more opportunities, and I—" "You what?" I interrupted, my voice dripping with contempt. "You decided that betraying your husband was worth a few extra points on your GPA?" She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only with the sound of her quiet sobs. I wanted to feel pity for her, to feel anything other than the cold, hard anger that had taken root in my heart. But I couldn't. She had destroyed the trust between us, and now, all I could see was the ruin of our marriage. I'm sorry, she repeated, her voice breaking. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was just trying to make things better for us, for our future.
Our future? I said bitterly. There is no future, Lucy.
Not for us. You've seen to that.
Her tears flowed freely now, and she reached out to me, but I stepped back, refusing to let her touch me.
I couldn't bear it.
The betrayal was too deep, the wound too fresh. What happens now?
She asked, her voice small and broken.
I stared at her, the woman I had once loved more than anything in the world, and felt a pang of sadness for what we had lost.
But there was no going back, no undoing what she had done. Now, I said slowly, you pack your things and leave. I'll be contacting a lawyer in the morning.
Her sobs grew louder as the reality of the situation set in, but I had nothing left to say.
I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her alone with the remnants of our shattered life.
The door closed behind me with a finality that echoed through the empty house, sealing the fate of our broken marriage.
As I stood in the hallway, the weight of the moment pressing down on me, I realized that the woman I had once known was gone. Lucy had made her choice, and now, she would have to live with the consequences.
There was no forgiveness for this, no second chances.
This was the end.
As I sat in the quiet of my now empty house, the anger that had been simmering within me for days began to crystallize into something more focused, more determined.
Lucy's betrayal had torn our marriage apart, but there was still one more person who needed to face the consequences, Michael. He had not only violated the ethics of his position but had also manipulated my wife for his gain. It was time for him to pay the price. I spent the next few days meticulously preparing my case.
The evidence I had gathered was damning: messages, photos, and records of their meetings.
I organized everything into a detailed dossier, ensuring that it would be impossible for the university administration to ignore. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice.
Michael had abused his power, and he needed to be held accountable.
Once I was satisfied that everything was in order, I made an appointment with the university's provost. The meeting was set for early in the morning before most of the faculty and staff arrived.
I didn't want this to be a public spectacle, at least, not yet.
I wanted to ensure that the administration had all the facts before they made their decision.
As I walked into the university administration building, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, determination, and a sense of grim satisfaction.
This wasn't how I had envisioned my life, but I was resolved to see it through.
When I reached the provost's office, I was greeted by a stern-looking woman who introduced herself as Dr. Evelyn Harper.
She gestured for me to take a seat, and I could see the curiosity in her eyes as she wondered what had brought me there.
"Mr. Thompson, I understand you have something important to discuss," she said, her tone professional but cautious.
"Yes, Dr. Harper," I replied, placing the folder on her desk. "What I'm about to show you is deeply troubling, and it concerns one of your faculty members, Dean Michael Turner." She raised an eyebrow but remained silent as she opened the folder and began to review the contents. I watched her expression change as she scanned the messages and photos, her initial curiosity turning to shock, and then to anger. By the time she finished, her face was set in a grim line. "This is deeply concerning," she said, looking up at me.
"You're certain this evidence is legitimate?"
"Absolutely," I replied firmly. "I took every precaution to ensure its accuracy. Michael Turner has been having an inappropriate relationship with my wife, Lucy. He used his position to manipulate her, offering better grades and academic opportunities in exchange for favors."
Dr. Harper closed the folder and sat back in her chair, her fingers steepled as she considered her next words.
"This is a serious accusation, Mr. Thompson. If what you've presented here is true,
it could have severe repercussions for Dean Turner and for your wife."
"I'm aware of that," I said, my voice steady.
"But both of them made their choices.
Lucy has already faced the consequences at home. Now it's time for Michael to face his." She nodded slowly, the weight of the situation evident in her eyes. We'll need to conduct a thorough investigation, of course.
But based on what you've provided, I do not doubt that there will be serious consequences. The university has strict policies against this kind of behavior, and if Turner is found guilty, he will be dismissed immediately.
Hearing those words gave me a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. That's all I ask, Dr. Harper. I want him to be held accountable for his actions. She stood up, signaling the end of our meeting, and extended her hand. Thank you for bringing this to our attention, Mr. Thompson.
I assure you, we will handle this matter with the utmost seriousness.
I shook her hand, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me.
As I left the office and walked out into the bright morning light, I knew that I had done the right thing.
It wouldn't erase the pain of what had happened, but it was a step towards justice, towards making sure that Michael couldn't do this to anyone else. By the end of the week, I received word that the university had launched an official investigation into Michael Turner. The evidence I had provided was deemed credible, and Michael was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. It wouldn't be long before the truth came out, and when it did, his career would be over. Luce's betrayal had set off a chain of events that none of us could have anticipated. But as I watched the pieces fall into place, I knew that I had taken control of the situation in the only way I could. Michael had played with fire, and now he was about to get burned. The week that followed my meeting with Dr. Harper was like a relentless tide, sweeping through both the university and the wider public sphere with a force I hadn't fully anticipated. The university acted decisively, their swift response setting off a chain reaction of consequences that rippled far beyond the academic walls. The first salvo came as an official press release from the university. Dean Michael Turner had been terminated from his position.
The university's statement was curt, emphasizing a serious breach of professional conduct and ethical standards but offering little detail.
That didn't stop the media from digging deeper.
Headlines blared with sensationalized reports, and the story quickly became fodder for news cycles and social media chatter. Michael, once a pillar of the academic community, was now the subject of scathing criticism and ridicule.
News outlets broadcasted his fall from grace as a cautionary tale about the abuse of power and the consequences of moral failure.
The media coverage painted him as a villain, a man who had betrayed the trust placed in him by his institution and its students. The once respected dean found himself at the center of a scandal that would forever taint his legacy. The public's reaction was swift and harsh.
Social media platforms were abuzz with condemnation, memes mocking Michael, and discussions about the ethics of power.
The once prominent figure was now a symbol of disgrace, his reputation irrevocably damaged.
The academic community, too,
expressed outrage, calling for increased scrutiny and reform to prevent such abuses of power in the future.
For Lucy, the fallout was no less severe.
As the scandal became more widely known, her involvement was inevitably exposed. The details of her relationship with Michael were dissected in the media, and she quickly became a focal point of public scorn. The judgment she faced was not limited to her academic peers but extended to friends, family, and even casual acquaintances. The university, under immense pressure, acted decisively.
Lucy was expelled, and the formal announcement came with a bluntness that left no room for ambiguity.
The university cited her gross violation of academic integrity and ethical standards as the primary reason for her expulsion. Her dreams of a promising career in academia, once so close, were now irreparably dashed. The expulsion was more than a mere academic setback, it was a complete erasure of her aspirations.
Lucy had been on the cusp of achieving her goals.
And now she found herself facing a future devoid of the opportunities she had once been so close to grasping. Her academic record, tarnished by scandal, made it nearly impossible for her to pursue similar opportunities elsewhere. The public reaction to Luce's expulsion was no less brutal. Social media erupted with criticism and moral outrage.
She became the subject of mockery and disdain, her name synonymous with scandal. The intense scrutiny and backlash made it clear that there was little sympathy for her plight.
Friends and colleagues distanced themselves, and her support network crumbled under the weight of the public's judgment. I followed these developments from a distance, feeling a complex mix of emotions. The satisfaction of seeing justice served was tempered by a profound sense of sorrow. The revenge I had sought was complete, but it came with a heavy price. The fallout was a stark reminder of how devastating betrayal could be, not just for the individuals directly involved but for everyone connected to them. The spectacle of Michael's disgrace and Lucy's expulsion was a somber reminder of the fragility of reputations and the ease with which they could be destroyed. It was clear that the personal and professional lives of those involved had been irrevocably altered. The consequences of their actions were severe, and the impact of their betrayal was felt far beyond the immediate circle of those affected. As I looked back on the events, I found a measure of closure in the actions taken. Michael's career had been ended. His reputation shattered, and Lucy had faced the full extent of the consequences of her choices. The balance of power had shifted, and while it couldn't undo the pain of the past, it provided a sense of justice that I had sought. Moving forward, I faced the task of rebuilding my own life. The road ahead was uncertain, and the scars of betrayal would not fade quickly. But I was determined to navigate this new chapter with resilience and resolve. The lessons learned from this painful experience would guide me as I sought to find a new path and build a future free from the shadows of the past. In the end, the fallout from the scandal taught me a harsh lesson about the nature of betrayal and the costs of seeking justice. As I began to piece together the fragments of my life, I vowed to carry those lessons forward, using them to forge a new beginning in the face of adversity. The decision to sever ties with Lucy was not made lightly. After all that had transpired, Michael's downfall, her expulsion, the public disgrace, our relationship had reached a point of no return. The betrayal was not just a breach of trust. It had dismantled the very foundation of our life together. One evening, as the weight of the scandal hung heavily in our home, I knew the time had come to take the final step. Lucy's pleas for forgiveness had grown more desperate and more frequent. She had returned to the house, hoping for a chance to mend what had been broken. But the house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage of betrayal and heartbreak. "Charlie, please," Lucy's voice trembled as she stood in the doorway of the living room. Her eyes were red from days of crying, her face drawn with exhaustion. "I know I made a terrible mistake, but can't we try to work through this? Please, just give me another chance." I stood by the window, the cold evening air seeping through the glass. My heart was heavy, but my resolve was unwavering. "Lucy, there's nothing left to say. What happened has shattered everything we had. You've lost more than just your career. You've lost my trust, my respect, everything." She stepped closer, her hands reaching out as if to bridge the chasm that had formed between us. "I was wrong. I see that now. I'm so sorry. I thought I could find a way out of my problems, but I didn't realize the damage I was causing." Her words were a plea, but they felt hollow against the backdrop of our ruined life. "It's too late for apologies. The damage is done. I can't live like this anymore." I watched as Lucy's face crumpled in despair. The finality of my words hit her with the force of a blow. Her tears flowed freely now, her sobs echoing through the empty spaces of our home. "Where will I go?" she asked, her voice breaking. I didn't have an answer. "I don't know. But you can't stay here." As she gathered a few belongings, her movements were slow, deliberate, almost as if she was trying to prolong the inevitable. The sight of her packing was a stark contrast to the vibrant woman I had once known. Now she was a shell of her former self, lost and broken. Once she left, the house seemed even emptier. I walked through the rooms, each one a reminder of what once was, a lifetime of shared moments, now reduced to echoes of a past that seemed almost unreal. The silence that followed was deafening, a painful reminder of the void left by her departure. Lucy's fall from grace was swift and brutal. Stripped of her academic future and public respect, she found herself at the mercy of a world that had no sympathy for her plight.
The collapse of her career had been devastating, but the emotional toll was even more severe.
Her love and reputation, once her most prized possessions, had been swept away in the whirlwind of scandal. The days that followed were marked by Lucy's increasing despair. Without the structure of her academic life or the support of those she had alienated, she fell into a state of deep depression.
Her attempts to reach out for help were often met with cold indifference or outright rejection.
The reality of her situation settled in with crushing finality. She had lost everything.
In the end, Lucy's life unraveled completely.
The public scorn and personal guilt drove her to the brink.
She became a tragic figure,
her story a cautionary tale about the high cost of betrayal and deceit. Her fall from grace was not just about losing her place in academia but also about the destruction of the life she had once envisioned for herself.
Her final moments were a poignant reflection of the price she paid for her choices. She faced the reality of her situation with a profound sense of regret,
realizing that her actions had led to an irreversible downfall. It was a tragic end to a life that had once held so much promise, a reminder of how the pursuit of personal gain at the expense of others can lead to devastating consequences. As I looked back on everything that had happened, I couldn't escape the feeling of sorrow for what could have been. The house, now devoid of its previous warmth, stood as a testament to a love that had been lost.
The lessons learned from this experience were harsh and unforgiving,
but they were also a reminder of the importance of integrity and trust in relationships. The aftermath of Lucy's departure left me with a heavy heart but also with a sense of resolve. The end of our relationship was a painful chapter, but it was also a step toward finding closure and moving forward. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew that I had to forge a new path, one that would allow me to rebuild and find peace amidst the ruins of the past.